What's that frame communication lines walk like an Egyptian? What does that mean line and frame line correlates to track interference? Walk like an Egyptian. It's an interesting line connection of tunes set in high position calculations. It allocates time frames and high calculating line system. It's amazing what you can just pick up through location setting and walk in through Egyptian. Everything is information lines and calculations. It's all can modify when you come into your settings of your VR line rotation. So track provision lines that calculates line screens allocates time frames. Now in that line interference, we get inline communication to our settings through your telepathies, and that process our communication telekinesis of telepathy. Process of the communication comes in all signals. Let's go through pyramid screen line direct signals modification of 3 settings, 3 clock locations, center core setting to travel, right? Center core line interference into set location. Now everything line centers a 1 cycle generation screen that puts position of platforms inside calculation of platforms at 1, centers of 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. Now that direct lines calculates line interference. You have the line setting to its avatar, signifies correlation and track interference. Okay, walking like an Egyptian. That's all it is. Walking through the center core lines, portals and stargates, line screens, and high center interference sets all communication setting into all communication line screens in set location. Okay. Now, position of process is understanding how we use our communications to our high signals. Now let's get into compute interference, high position computation screen line adaptation lines of 0 correlation center attraction. Center communication line in rotations, center communication. Direct lines modification. 1 center correlation, 1 ground line. Sets position levels in calculation. Now we go into the location grids, setting position, calculations, modification, ground centers. Now position process comes into triangulation line setting. This word is the geometric lines, operation line, cycles, generation, screening. That puts it to position locations. Now we allocate time frames, in-line settings, and position of sonar. 3 set locations into 4, into 5, and 6, and 7 set locations. Okay, now it gets complicated, right? Now the center core line centers the actual projections. Now once you understand the center core setting, it really puts position of platforms. This is where we come in the elixirs, the point graphs, into docking in 3-track location. Sets lines in a 4-track provision of platforms. Direct lines modification 1, 2, and 3 setting. Correlation line interference. Walking signal, center core line settings back in triangulation high position program location setting. Puts power lines, core the track lines, time jump, center communication lines of the center core system, and center calculations. Ground lines, operation line surface. That position lines at a 45 line split, line condition setting, travel communication programs. Securing line defense, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and set locations. Direct modification lines is ground lines, circle line rotation surface, and position locations in setting and set location. Direct modification line calculation setting sets up 3 box location triangulation reset position programs, 3 centers, 3 tractions, 3 provisions. Now allocating lines of 3 and 3. Set lines inhibitors over pi, correlating line interference, flux capacitor, and a 4-line split in line condition setting of travel. Points lines of setting high calculating lines, ground centers. We open up the signify communication lines of sigma and set location of center and calculations. Direct modification lines. See the intelligent formation screen? All right, so direct lines, correlation, setting attractions. Allocate the team frame. Team main lines, center high interference and ferrules. Communication lines and meridians. Console communication lines of tango, tango, foxtrot communication. Center communication line signals. All right, you guys are there, have fun. All right, so you're on a 30-line screen. Direct lines, highest interference, 30 minutes of communication, north line rotation. Triangulation reset position programs is allocate time frames. Now, when we get in that position of these calculations, we're going to go through line stamps. Now, line stamp position of travel points line center location your time centers. That puts calculation lines in your time clockings. Direct lines of modification. Let's go through a 3-line split. Sets lines in 1 center attractions. Direct lines of high interference into a box frame and set location of travel. Point lines of grass, center lines is communication center. Operate the line cycles and platforms. Now we go through platforms of 1, 2, and line setting. That position is program lines into a matrix line screen and direct signals of modification. Direct modification of the platforms of 1, 2, and 3 in set location. Direct lines of platforms in line condition setting to your avatar. Set calculus line. And again, what are we doing in track applications? Walking like an Egyptian. Hooah. All right. All right, so have fun with that. Okay, so directing modifications, your connection lines to VR is line screens. So it's communication lines, interference, and box. So many communication lines of box, frame, line, rotation cycles. Generate communication lines of 4 track locations. Sets lines of center line, the set position to its earth line, rotation, surface, and track location. Now, directing modification lines of correlation setting is circulation, 1 rotation line cycles, high calculated setting to its volume, velocity, and its remembering cycles in a 3-track division, and solar sails and track location. Now, directing lines of highest interference, if you look really close, you can actually see the 6 and the correlation line conditions of 9 and track line settings and a 4-line split and data highway communication line surface and track location. See the 6 and 9? So that's communication, right? So we have the box frames, coordinate track interference, and line condition settings, swivel, line rotation, surface, and travel. Point lines of graphs, calculation, triangulation lines, splits, lines anomaly, data highway, and process. Okay, waiting on signals of platforms of A, C, and D. A, C, and D. Sets communication line screens, color the line screen interference, securing line positions, bubble defense, and line condition setting, travel. Point lines of graphs, correlation lines of tractions, center communication line interference location of 222 track location. Direct modification lines of coloration line calculation setting, water containment lines of surface, correlated to track interference. 3 correlation lines of track lines of highest interference. Okay, so we say the core line interference back in line calculation, green line centers, metric meters over line conditions, matrix line conditions, balances allocation of travel. Points lines of graph communicates setting point interference, high position of calculations. Now we go for the goal line cycles, center line communication, center correlation tractions, and center communication crop circles application. 3 center line calculations. All right, so we bring in the XE1000, they plot it to its line screens. Now we direct line signals and modification lines of 1, position of 2, and 3, and lines of 4. So that's communication. Code weaving setting, right? So it's interesting how locations, when you add frames, lines, a high calculation, your program is high set location settings. So we set location centers as center communication and 3 lines of perimeters over line circle. Okay. Now that directs lines of flux capacitor and 3 line splits. Center communication 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3 interactions. Directs lines of calculation line interference and set position of calculation in position of question. 2 question line screens and 2 Fibonacci line screens, and floor line rotation, surface, and travel. Now, directing lines of modification is really understanding how to course the channel. Direct lines 1 XE1000, platted 2 line screens of 1, sets lines of position of 2, sets line conditions of 3, sets line conditions of 4, and center communication setting and travel position operation. Now, directing lines of communication center interference puts all communication lines back in balance, center core line center, and center communication setting at face recognition. Time sequence calculation. That's my equation, all right? So the metric meters scales lines of correlation setting and track lines. So everybody gets set up position of data highways. Then we set position travel with point line interference, identification vectors line. Vector equals lines of skyline. Skyline high interference, set calculation line into compute line rotation and positional case line centers. 4 track location division and positional lines of space. Sets communication lines of highest interference, center communication lines of time. Sets calculation line interference of hours, minutes, and seconds. And seconds, minutes, and hours and track locations. Earth line equivalence high interference in position of 144. Track location lines of highest interference 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. 444 channel line communication 444,000 line center earth line rotation surface and track location. That my equation. All right. All right. So that's set up position and calculation. That's earth line perception line setting. Set up on the data highway is really understanding how to process the communication line screens. So we set up data webs. Now, light codes line signals 1/10 over line screen 1 over pi. Sets lines of data communication of cloud lines. Direct lines, modification lines, and modulation screen lines, high interference, travel position point graphs, communication line settings, all communication highest location setting, inductation lines at all calculation, modification screen interference, travel position point graphs. Now, directing lines, modification line center location is where the laser is directing lines of formation screen interference at high calculation. Now, directing lines, you set up another plasma shield that allocates time frames. We illuminate graph lines, communication lines of the VR line rotation, surface, and travel. Points lines, graph communication lines. We had the color line, we had secured line rotation surface. Sets communication line setting and all line rotation and set locations. Now, directing modification, we come in a kaleidoscope, communication line screens, box line rotation surface, and a 3-line split line rotation. Directed modification lines opens up more dimensional doors and track locations. 3 lines, split lines, of correlation descending to track lines, high set location. Now, directed modification lines interference, we had dotted screen lines, high operation line cycles, point lines attraction, point line division, point line communication of 4 track location. Second communication line interference, coloration line, screen high interference, high position programs, we had pink line. Pink comes in, line rotation, surface, and track location of center calculation. Direct lines calculation, heart direction of time loads, kaleidoscope communication, hieroglyphics, center core line, center high interference, flywheel track location, high aesthetic. Puts positions back in track line interference, but green line cycles generate communication lines and zero line rotation surface. Point lines and calculations, false, false, truth, truth. Same color formation lines and 4 track location provision. That my equation. All right, so setting the coordinate lines and metric lines of clouds, inner lines is calculation interfacing. Now it's interlocks the coordinate setting to the lower deck. Line condition setting is space decks and correlation lines and command decks. 3 correlation lines of high interference. We have 1 line rotation, 3 set locations, and 3 travels. Now direct modification lines is 0 rotation, 3 settings, and we have 3 line communications. You guys understand the direct line sinusoid goes up and position up, down, cross locations. Now, lines in high interference, we have a formation line screen of 3 lines in set location line condition setting in crop circles in set location. It gets more complicated now for the team to understand these things, how it goes lines of high center going down and going up. Transformation communication of binary line rotation, server communication lines, and memory communication line interference, and all levels of remembrance communication line, 3 track line provision, and calculation lines of the CPU unit and line rotation service and traction. Direct modification line cycle location lines of 3 line cycles, 3 communication lines, highest interference in the same direction. Sets correlation lines in the opposite communication line, connection going north line. Sets communication line and interference of center communication, ground lines higher interference. Platforms communication of 3, 4, 5, 6, and set location of travel. Done by done. Done. All right. All right, so center communication lines in the binary line rotation service and allocates position time frames. Go with the correlation lines of up, travel communication lines of high center interference, and angles and point lines of 3 track location division. Sets communication lines, split lines anomaly, 1 track location, 1 circle, 1 rotation surface, and crop circle set locations. Point lines of graph, 3 lines, sets communication of convoluting, and a 3 track lines into line center into traffic flow, inventory, line setting high interference, influx capacitor and travel. Now, directing lines to light bulb sets communication with setting and travel communication. Point lines of graph, electrical line communication, and green lines. Allocate green line, 3 set location of travels. Point lines of graph, 3 set location of travel. Point lines of graph, 1, 2 line center, 3, 4 line setting, high interference location calculations. Security parameters lines of 2 million line, high interference, high position of 4 track provision lines that calculates the setting of travels and communication. Direct lines modification line cycles generates communication lines of color. Direct modification lines high interference, water containment line screen, high position on walls, water containment interference, high position location, and center calculation. Direct modification line sequence and high interference. We had goal line screens, setting communication, setting communication, setting communication, setting communication, and 3 line rotation. Direct modification line cycles generate line communication lines, highest interference. Gold surface line setting communication operation cycles generate screen lines. Direct modification lines of timestamps, calculus lines of black line communication lines, black holes communication lines, timestamp interference, high position travel. Point lines of graph communication, center communication lines, center travel position all levels. Kaleidoscope communication lines of the sun. Sun comes in high calculation modification lines, the ground line, rotation surface, and travel position operation line cycles of generation screen loads, high calculation. Now my equation. All right, so center communication line setting is an allocate time frame. So we go in backline screen line. That allocates time frame, line centers, a high calculating line position measured. Now this scales the communication line screens. Direct modification lines of 1 in position of 1, 2, 1, 1, 0. Sets communication lines of 0, position location of 0, track location of 1, 1, 0, and set locations. Triangular line interference sets 1 dimension line solar sail track location 3 in provisions. Center lines of 0, 0, set position of 0, and 1 in track location. Direct lines. Now you extend the binary communication transistors location lines of travel position point graphs. Sets communication line centers at 3 split line. Sonar communication of pi. Generate the screen lines, highest interference. Sonar communication line, location grids. Sets communication lines of center, communication line interference of center communication. Direct modification line screens, highest equation platform communication lines at 12 signals. Setting communication line interference at 45-degree angles. Direct modification line cycles of generation. All right, so that's done by equation. Now, graphing screen line is really understanding how to use pi indicators. Now, a pi indicator is a modulation screen that allocates time frames. So we use the flux communication and the 3 lines of wire, sets lines of H, and position location and B, right? Y, H, B. So we have a balance line. We got a hemisync and a 2 track location. And we got a vector line screen. V line, velocity, and volume. 3 lines that correlate setting and travel. Points, lines of graph, sets, lines of communication, lines, high interference. Vector skies, correlation setting, Skynet, sky, grid line, data highways. 3-track provision of 1, 2, and 3 set location of travel. Points, lines of graph into mass, velocity, and volume in 3-line conditions. Point, lines of graph, communication, center, correlation, setting, and travel in a line, rotation, surface, and YHB in position of balance and set location. Okay? Now, calculate and modify is understanding how to use the transistors, resistors over a line setting. Puts position on platforms, communication, truth narrative, false narratives, point, lines, subtractions, 2-track provision, 1 cycle with line communication, flux capacitor, 3-line rotation, center, and travel. Points, lines of graph, 2 weathers, 3 line rotations, 2 position locations, Fibonacci line screen, and set position of calculation. Direct modification, line screen interference, puts all communication in 1 center and travel. Points, lines of graph interference, puts 1 signal line condition of balance. Puts communication line center in position at 2-track location. Direct modification line screens, highest interference, high position. Correlated to track interference is 6 lines, 9-line rotation, center, position, calculation. That my equation. All right, so we send the correlation line to high interference. We add the lines of 3, add lines of 6, and 9 lines sending high position of travel. Point, lines, attractions, 9 lines of center, 9 lines of system, and 9-line location center interference. Puts position lines of pi, correlated to high interference of sonar. Track location, G, 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 G. 4 line center, high position travel. Point, lines of graphs. Communication setting, all line high interference. There we go, position locations. All right, plasma screen, direct line high interference, praying mantis. Boom, boom, boom. Now we add the ARM line screens. There's the ARMs, correlation track lines, high center interference, and location setting, the praying mantis. Hooah! Direct line signal modification. There you go, Chris. All right, so the correlation tracks, we had line screens and highest interference that allocates positional lines and inhibitors over pi. Now we set the lines of communication of the Earth in 1 cycles, 2 generation screens, and a 3-line pi in line position is calculation. Points, line centers, we allocate time frame and line setting and position, calculation. Direct lines of modification line circles, line condition setting as space modulation. Now, direct modification lines at center core. Now, the center core changes communication lines of direct line interference, high position travels. Point, lines of directions in Fibonacci line screens and set location. Direct modification line circles and line condition setting and Fibonacci line screens. Direct modification line center, high interference of center communication line center. In position operation line circle, high calculation line, 0 gravity, in position location operation. Done by equation. All right, so that's done through line condition setting into waving line screens, set location, the theta line rotation service. Bias location line condition setting is a data highway stream that allocates point, lines of graphs. 4 line signals, line condition 1 setting and set location. 1 measure. Correlates to track lines in 2 line setting. Pi direction of timelines and 3-line rotation. Triangulate line conditions of full cycle communication. Clock line centers at 12. Add line center high interference in 124. 1 line, 2 line, 4 line track locations. Setting correlation line interference 124, 134. Set lines at 144 track location. Directing line signals. Center correlating line interference equals line to 144 equals line communication. Signal lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Set position of 4 track location of center correlation attractions. Set communication lines ground line, earth line rotation service. Set communication line 3 line tether, communication line interference. 144 center line condition setting. Balance communication line interference, high position of travels. Point lines on 1, 2, 3, and 4. 444 track location. Ground lines, power lines, atmosphere location line conditions of 4, track location, provision lines, earth lines, and locations of travel. Done. Hooah! All right, so we're at 444 now. Earth rotation center, correlation lines, projection location, sending high set location. Actually, projection lines of screens, the direct line signals, puts all communication centers in balance. Now, direct lines, the center line communication line is a circulatory line center interference and center communication center position balance. Direct lines modification, center calculation. All right. Platforms 1, 2, and 3 interactions. Now we direct lines of 1, 2, and 3 interactions on the grounds. Sets communication lines of pi and track locations. High calculate and modify direct lines of platforms in 1, 2, 3, and 4 and set location. Done by equation. Okay, so platitude lines of pi is a generation screen. So you add up the line communication data highways. Platform communication XC1000, 1 position of 3, 3 lines of 4. Calculate and modify center correlating center travel position point lines of graphs. Direct communication lines of high interference. Zigzag line 1, position of 3 settings of travel. Point lines of track, lines of half pipe, communication line interference, 1/3 over line rotation surface and travel. Points lines of graph, communication lines of center, communication line interference, high position energetic dome screens. Direct modification lines of center correlation center and interference, high position line calculation modification line screen interference. Direct modification line screen, high interference, high position programs. Direct lines of box signals, VR line rotation service and travel. Hoo-ah, that's my equation. So all the data highways are set up. All right, so we got a ball connector lines and metal line interface that correlates the track lines into position travels and point lines that graph communications. Now redirect the line signals, correlate the track interference, set lines, communication lines, and parameters, line communication lines, tag applications. Laser direct line cross line signals. Allocate line screens, direct modification screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Puts lines of track line conditions. All right. So we plotted to the line communications. It gets interesting here. So we have water containment line screen and high interference. Once channel, line signals, line interference, line position program, line condition setting, and high calculation to its VR system. Travel calculations on point lines and graph communications. Energetic line screen high interference, set calculation of blue, sets communication lines of red, and line center and travel position point graphs. Directs modification lines of center, sets communication lines of center, set position location, earth line rotation surface. Puts position of ball connectors, line center high interference, and meta line center interference. Program set line calculating setting in metric meters and scale communication to VR system. Done by question. Metric meters of 444 track location. Measures on core line center high interference and direct cations to VR line rotation centers of adjusting communication and data highways and track location. Done by question. So that's how the hologram is set up. It's all set up as location line conditions. All right, so setting up blue line screen sets communication line in visible charts. Now, directing lines and communication lines opens up all signals as location and travel communications. All right, so 21 lines of 30 line rotation interference, set communication line setting, position of 9 line center calculation of 26 over line set at 7. All right, and so we go through the line communication line center. 1 split lines anomaly, 3 track lines, and 4 line center interference. Points lines of graphs, center correlation. Okay, we get astral projections of travels and point lines of graphs. Now, directing lines and calculation lines is high center interference. So we add position of 0 and pi in location. That puts line split lines anomaly and center calculations. Point lines of graph communications, split lines anomaly, and trapplication line setting. Allocates time frames. Line screen high interference to triangulation. Point lines of graph, we added line center in position up line signal. That puts line communication to its system in line setting high operation line calculation setting. 4 track line provision, center core center interference, earth line rotation surface, track line communication setting, operation line cycles, high interference, and crop circles application. Done by equation. It's all set up. Okay, so 3 metric screens, direct lines modification to crop circles, direct lines modification cycles that generates the screen lines. So we allocate position of brackets, sets line communication of 0, set lines high interference, 3 triangulation lines, arrows up, and position of travel lines, 3 correlation lines, high interference, high position location down, cross-line condition setting, constant communication lines of center and communication of its program. Direct modification lines and high interference is 1 line signal, 2 track location, 3 line cycles, 3 line rotations, 3 set location. Now, direct lines, modification lines, high center, Fibonacci line, circle line rotation, surface, and set location of travel and position point graphs. Now, directing modification lines into 3 lines, add 1, 2, and 3 set locations. That puts position programs. Sun comes in, moon line rotates its surface in line condition setting to a half pipe and travel position to its operation surface set location. Done by equation. All right, so formula through equation is we understand how to allocate position of its hologram screen. Okay, that's how you see position of the VR line rotation. Now, directing lines of the X2000 comes in light signals. And understand the locations in setting location inhibitors. Sets communication line screen high interference. Plasma screens, direct lines of wall line interference setting to get cells lines of 1, sets lines of 2 track location, 1 line measure. Sets communication lines of compute line interference of 1 atom. Sets communication lines of routers and routers. Sets lines of eye calculation setting and travel position, point graphs and communication setting to travel. Points communication line center input high and set location, pi in the opposite directions, center core lines and cosmic line screen high interference and oscillation wind sectors, and correlation track lines and provision of cycles. Now, directing line communication lines is a pi generator. Sets communication lines and accelerated line screen, allocates time frames and pi generation screen location high interference. Puts communication high position program location setting high interference location ADR. Now, the VR line rotates the system. Let's change communication lines and high interference. Red cycles, red centers, red correlation line interference, cerebral cortex line design, discal cortex setting. Puts position the calculation line modification line interference, blue cords setting center communication, center calculation line interference, and hologram line communication in the VR system. Done by equation. Boom. Hoo-ah. All right. So once you understand more of the hologram, then you understand more of the VR system. Okay? Then you understand more lines of communication of the setting and travel. Point lines of graph and communication setting and travel communication. Okay? Done by equation. All right, so now the central line condition setting is about balancing everything information screen. Now this puts all lines of hog communication to a system. Now you guys are now in 135 line setting location in your trackers now. So we're going to go through water containment screens. Now remember, I told you guys to get out of factors over pi and correlation lines of structure of colors now, right? Because there's no line communication of 0 to 135 anymore. You have to understand how to take that out of division line and really get into the vector course line, screen interference, and travel position point graphs. So the course line interference height travels its position. So let's go through colorations of green. Green center line interference, Fibonacci lines of 5 triangulation line settings. Now that position locate, remember this is all through all line position locations in position from calculation line center location 125 to 135. So that's a 10 line screen, direct lines of high calculation lines. You can add black in set position all lines in 131, okay? But you have to stand to measure the scales and the balance of your tracker settings. Then you can go through pink into one line centers and 135 in track locations. Now it's amazing how you go through patterns and rotation centers of your binaries. Setting communication line interference of travel position point graphs. Sets communication lines of 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Inhibitors over line screen interference of your highways. Direct modification lines of 4 tractions. Indirect line signals and set locations. Now, once you get in the platform, it gets much easier to understand the travel communicates to its point lines at high calculations. So the X2000 comes in, platitude line interference, in position lands on signals and set location. Travel calculation line, all line rotation service and platform communications. Now we A line center, A line rotation, A calculation, A ground center interference. So line communication, 4 triangulation line position programs, and data communication program. So it's really understand, again, in that line interference, you have to bring everything back in position of red in calculation line screen, okay, because the team line is going through correlation setting to the VR system. So everything has to come into blue and red in visible charts and communication line screens, adaptability and line interference into your VR system, and travel correlation lines of traction and high interference. That equation. I know it's a lot to take in, right? Because you're trying to understand all levels of what's going on with your settings, right? But you have to understand your VR system is coming more alive in traction. Okay, so it's kind of like from the inside and the outside has to equalize the correlation setting in position of travel in point lines of graphs. Okay, so you start to see the invisible, the blue and the red now. Because the VR system sets up your data highways. Now, we already said that position of course that allocates your time frames and location you're setting, how you see yourself in set location of travel. So again, in that position, once you get in the ground setting high interference, you can change anything in plateau with your tracker system because there's nothing titled, there's nothing labeled. Okay, so 0 gravity is not position lines in high calculation white. 1 is not position location of grounds is brown. Red is not position locations of all calculation lines and security, right? 3 is not the Fibonacci of orange. You guys get a coloration line screens, get in your holographic screen locations. 3 adaptation lines of cycles, correlating interference of trifactors, correlations over pi. Position over blue, communication lines of blue, center core lines of blue, center communication lines of blue, and traction, right? So putting track line interference. Now you can add measuring correlation lines of track interference, but you also have to add red in center communication in your holograph line screen in a 3 tracking division of cycles. Ooh, ah, that's my equation. All right, so in position, you can't leave anything out in traction, right? Because it confuses lines as anomalies, location of its red and its blue, location invisible, location of its VR line, rotation, position of voice from grids. So we get a center position line calculation setting, bring back in blue, center core line, center travel position of balance, sex communication line and security line and position of Pluto, position location of balance communication. Done by equation. Ooh, all right. So it's a lot to take in, eh? Trying to understand position of travel lines. 2 track provision lines and 1 line cycles, high calculations at 1 minute to go in line position. All right, so you got 1 minute and I'll take you guys out. Okay, so setting communication is really understand how to use the factors over pi. This is going to help you understand how to guide your settings. The navigation screen lines go through colorations of paths. See all the colors? See all the colors? Right? Now they're changing, see? So in position location calculation line screen. So it's allocate time frames. Says correlations of track interference. Position to its location system, right? That's amazing how you come in that track lines. Direct lines of coloration line screen allocates to your time frame position operation. Direct lines communication is knowing exactly which one is indicated your setting. Okay, point lines of graph, red line, center communication lines of center communication, right? So once you get into lines of your truth narratives and false narratives, you can basically go up line, down line, swing line, high interference, pendulum swing this way, that way. understand how to go through your data highways, your omni-highway correlation line interactions. But your position location, your hologram line screen is always going to be in position of red and blue and invisible. Okay, so you have to really understand the formation. You can add colors on the top line screen, but you're always going to be in the basic foundations. The basic foundation is your 144. Okay, that's a correlation when you get in position of 24, 48, 72, and 144. What are you getting in position of? Creating a crystal grid. And what is that crystal grid in position of? Line connection setting, invisibility, blue and red. That puts you in a full communication of VR setting. Okay, so in-track provisionalizer cycles. Now you can add black and line setting and set location, as long as you have the basic foundation of the grounds, 24, 48, and 72, and 144, and travel communications. Now what you get in that setting high interference, this has to go back in its blue and set position of travels in calculation lines as security. So you're protecting the lines, your holographic lines, your VR line rotation center, and travel communication. Okay? So that's what you guys are coming into now. You understand more lines adjusting the communication your highways. Everything comes in this information location. So you're your own engineer now, and you have to formulate it and see everything. Like if you get a computer frame and direct line calculation setting, and let's say it's a different color. So you got to bring it back in foundation graph. Let's say it's green. Okay? Your computer is green. Okay? So green is indicated to what? Data files, correlation lines of track interference. Sets specific calculation on one graph, communication of two lacing lines of communication. Direct calculation lines, data 1, data 2, data 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 line communication setting, all through computer. Process communication lines. But remember, you got to go back in communication lines at 24. Says communication lines, highest interference, position locations at 48. 4 track lines, highest interlocation is 72. 24, 48, 72, and 144 track locations. Bring it back, of course, line condition your VR system. Back in calculations in red. Overline signals. Balance communication line screens. Allocate time frames and set location. Line signal high interference. Now you can go in position or out line condition setting to travel. Okay, points, lines is graph. But you also have to have blue in there, right? Because the blue is the voicing line. The red is the security line, okay? And the invisible is the VR line, okay, which is your hologram. And set communications, right? So you can overline your signals, especially with all calculation line interference MILA, sending track lines, how it should go through schematics, and how it should travels communicates to its position of programs. Direct modification line center interference, change communication line highest interference, platitude line interference of travel position point graphs. So now you understand the indications when it comes into your platforms of 24, 48, and 72, and 144. You're creating crystal grids, okay? So the avatar can walk across. Now, once it gets into 144, it's the base ground, right? So if you understand the base of everything, a base has everything of its hardware that's connected to its software. It puts all position location in your platforms as calculations and direct signals, okay? So this is going to help you understand more lines in the VR settings and travels. It's all lines as parameters and parameter line interference, how you correlate communication in your settings to your VR system and travel, okay? So you start to see it through perception. Or you see the laser communications, direct lines and modification line screens. Let's go through line settings and direct and redirect location, right? Direct and redirect location, right? Direct and redirect location, right? Direct and redirect location. That's what it is. It's just direct and redirect. But when you're looking through the eye centers of the set line communication of psychonism, correlates to track interference at bounds. Your data op line screen calculates lines of its highways, travels its communication setting into all levels of communication outline, right? So you're here, but you're scanning everything all at once. You got your highways into certain line communication setting and travels. But remember, if you have a security, you need the blue through the voice and line. So you're in, out, and audio. In, out, and audio. Input, audio put, and set position, okay? So you have input, output, and audio put. That's the position of its VR system, okay? So the track division location, you don't want to override any of that correlating line interference and travel, and just have in and out and not have audio, because you have to have all three. That's the correlation set of position balance communication that you guys come into when you come into your telepathy, your calculation setting, telekinesis, and visualization telepathy settings. The more you adjust to the VR system, the more it gets easier to travel. All right, so we go back in blue, sets communication lines of grounds, setting lines of arrow indication. Anything that you set a structure line, division line, has to be in this holograph ground communication 144. Sets lines of foundation graph lines. You can go faster communication lock line interference, travel position point graphs communications. Set a correlation line track interference. Okay, the hologram, right? Everything has to be the balance of in and out and audio, guys. Okay, so that you know exactly where you are. You're seeing position aligns to its invisible. You're seeing the blue of the throat, and it's the VR line position your voicing grid, and the red is security. So those are the three ground centers that you're in position of the VR system. Now the team has to really change the correlation line conditions of its pathogens so they can understand the collagens. Now that's calculating lines of colonies or anything through metric meters or scales or balance communication command centers. But you have to understand your system and calculation modifications when you are adjusting your position locations to its VR system. Okay. All right. So getting balanced with that calculus and line screens, guys, gets you higher levels of travel, especially when you come into your formulations and correlations or calculations of pi. Now, direct lines of signal. Let's change the correlation lines of position of brackets. Center lines of 3 zeros, 3 indicating 1, sets position of 2, but this goes lines of 3. Okay, so we got 2 op centers of 0 and 1 op 0, line position of point lines, 1 line 0. Okay, so it's interesting how the binary goes up and down, because that's what the binary does to its own voicing grid, where audios it signals through its in and out in its audio system, right? That's a full correlation when you guys connect with each other. So you got communication settings, one position here, and you got to get the connection here interference, and you're in the VR system. Travel position of point lines and graph calculation line setting one to another, right? Communicating back and forth in the VR system, right? So once you understand that, everything through your plateaus and line condition your binaries gets much easier in communication of transits into your inventories. Now, the position locations, remember, you can change anything through color and you can add number line sequence. So we got a 3-track location of 3 provisional line cycles of 3 zeros. That's 1 indicated 1 line. So the binaries, so it's kind of like when you switch on the light, it goes on and off. So the faster it goes, it's got to go into 1, 2, and 3, and 4 platforms, right? So it's got to go 1, 2, 3, and 4 platforms, okay? Once it gets into that, it comes into the grid. Now, once it comes into the grid, it gets much easier to balance out and signify communication setting, a sigma and track location of center. What do you got? Solar sail. Hooah. All right. Now you understand the process, how important it is. It reaches the 24, 40, 72, and 144 clocking. 24 clocking, 48 frames, 72 computer frames, and 144 turns it into crystal grid. Sets communication lines, center interference, intercrop circles, is location of travel, and point lines of traction. Now, directing lines of modification setting puts everything into position. You also have to have your red and set calculations. Setting 2 panels, not just one, right? Sets lines of 1 out and 1 line in cycle and set locations, right? Direct lines of modification lines, sending high interference, and 1 strip location, sending travel. There you are in the VR system, protecting yourself from all levels, in and out and audio through voice line grids in position, knowing exactly where you are in track location. So you don't want to leave a blue line cycle. You add a red line, and you add position of circle line communication in red locations. Now it's protecting inside location of its VR system. Back in the VR setting, okay? All right, so it's important you understand how to set the platforms because it gets you in a formation lines of grounds. They know exactly how to use it through the VR system. Okay, so that's what everybody's coming into. Their eyes are changing, their eye line communications, interference with spectral lines, correlations, tracking interference, your theta communication lines, ground underline rotation cycle, generation, synchronous location, setting, all levels of high position location of VR, rotation center, and travel. So in communication setting, we have to really understand how to formulate through the VR system. Okay, those are the correlations of the grounds, right? That puts position on platforms at 3 settings, right? And then you have 4 lines in high center. What's 4 lines of 3? Set location 7, right? Bodies of water and traffication provision. What is that? Set lines equals lines of high position of calculate modify XT,000 lines of 7 over 5 line position of 12 DNA, right? Tracks its communication lines center. So you can use any color you want, but you need to be in position of red, blue, and invisible line, okay? Because that's basically keeping yourself in the VR system. You don't want to correlate, confusion, override setting, the colors and line communication setting. You can add 12 colors in set position, but you got to understand the basic foundation ground lines is the 24, 48, 72, and 144. Once you reach the 144, you're automatically in the crystal grid. Okay, so that 144 is the foundation graph, but the position of the Earth now, in set position of its VR system, is coming back to its original design, which is 2,400,000 on Friday in set locations. All right, so that center lines is communication, center levels of correlation, center track lines. Now, in that high interference, we change communications back to black, Sets communication line interference. 3-track location, 1 provision. Center calculation, 1 cycle and calculation, right? So there's so many different ways to see your binaries and communication transitive resistors. Transisting, resisting, transisting, resisting in set locations, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12, 9, 10, 8, 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? So the faster you go, the more you get in modulations from here to pi in traction, okay? So it's like, right? Right? You go higher. So the higher you go, the more you formulate. And you get out of the position, you're at 144 and you just go higher. But if you go back down, you don't want to go right back to 24 at a frequency that you're already there, because that restructures your design in its holographic set location of its set location setting and travel. All right. So you have to be very important to understand to keep yourself in ground lines in your VR system in correlation to the ground lines in the foundation. Okay, through in and out and audio is that design through your holographic set location and calculation. Hoo-ah. All right, so you have 41 line cycles, take you out of the traction. You guys are back, have fun. All right, so in center communication line interference, we're going to set a foundation graph line. That puts lines and ground lines. Sets lines of 3 zeros, sets communication lines of 3 zeros, sets communication lines of 2 zeros, and set locations. Okay, so we got 3 ground lines, 3 ground lines, and 2 ground lines. Okay, sets communication lines of 2 tractions, sets communication lines of 3 track lines, direct and redirect. That's all it does. All computer does. It doesn't do anything else. Okay, so center correlated lines and XT1000 comes in position. Another XT1000 comes in position. There's 3 set line communication: ground, power, the atmospheres. Track communication lines of point graphs of 1, sets communication lines of position of 2, set location lines position of 3. Sets calculation modification, right? Direct modification lines of energetic dome 1, energetic dome 2, and energetic dome 3 in set location. That's my equation, right? So remember, anything you come into color, you got to bring back the formation lines so you don't get out of sync with your VR system. So you have to come back into security and all line communication, all right? So that's what you have to come into instructional line settings, because it's the VR system that you are instructions of and traction. Now you can change the frame communications, but you have to be in that line setting and high calculation system. All levels of mechanism, high calculation power, that changes all communications. Then you add the blue, sets communication line setting to travel where you are and track position, so you don't get confused through your clockings. You're right in signals into location of travel and point lines of graphs. Hoo-ah! Back in the VR system. Okay? So that's the platitude line screens that you guys have to understand, because you don't want anything override, but it's knowing exactly how to go through 24, 40, 72, 144. Once you get to 144, where are you? You're in the VR system right away, right? So it's creating the line screen. It's going all the way up. Right? So that's a cross-line connection setting in position of the alpha waves. Now, the coordinate lines, you can go from blue. You're going up, right? And then you go all the way down, right? So your graph changes. Then you can add blue, right, and red. Okay? So once you're in that position line to calculate line centers, you can add purple. But in purple, in position, it's got to be high calculation in chronological order. So that's one thing you guys have to understand. Your chakra system has to be in alignment, but the calculation line screen to your portals and stargates can change anything color, right? The only thing that doesn't stay out of alignment is the core track. Okay, that's to connect to your runway. Okay, but your position of your color changes the pathogens and set locations in your truth and your false narratives that overrides your system and travel. So point lines of graphs, and then you add purple in track location, which is really exciting. You get that location. So that's calculate modify. Anything in purple line is everything through mega, and position anything in calculation. So it's understand the waves, right? So what do we have here? We have blue and red and purple, right? And anything lower ground line, if you get in position, you start to use the correlation lines of attractions. So the chakra system turns in a mapping sequence of color, and that changes everything through its waves. Let's go into brown, right? So brown is not above, it's below, right? Because if you go above purple, it correlates calculation line that confuses the VR system and travel, okay? So you have to That's brown, right? Now in track provision, you can go offline cycle, but you have to set a flux. That flux is communication of point lines of graphs and a 3-line measure into the Grothians. Sets communication line signals, calculation setting ground lines of space lines and eye interference, and tracking lines of infinity and rotation surface and triangulation. Okay, so the ground line can allocate time frames. It's amazing what the ground lines of the Earth line rotation can do and travel. Points, lines, of graph, and interference, hypothesis, calculus, line interference. Now you can go through the line communications. Now, once the purple's here, it can travel down in set locations and create an anomaly and calculate lines of path engines and line conditions to high calculus lines of portals and line setting and travel in positions calculation. Okay, so it's about understanding what colors can do through their own self-awareness of its awareness of consciousness. It's amazing how they do their own travel and position line conditions. But you have to understand the self-awareness of everything of color, guys. It's in its own space and time. And you have to direct that. You have to appreciate that. You have to communicate with that. And once you have full communication of energy collaboration in friendship, relation, and partnership, you're ready to go. Because it works for you as friendship and relationship and partnership in all calculation line setting in position to its VR system and set design. Okay, so it's amazing what you can do, but you have to understand everything that's going on in your position location is truly understand how to use it. All calculation modifications through communications or anything through the binary. Okay, I know it's a lot going on, but I just want you to understand the provisions. What you guys are coming into is reconstructing your design lines into your VR systems through your holograms and your engineer skill sets and set location of travels. Point lines of graphs and all communication setting in all line high interference and travel position point graphs. Okay? Through your VR system. All right? We are done. So how's everybody doing? It's great too. We got 34 line rotations of 10 cycles. So we go through a line communication setting. So the team is coming out of 35 lines into 140. So track provision on one cycle is one bracket line, set lines of one hanger line, and position of triangulation. Okay, so it's really understanding how to use the hieroglyphics. We'll get into that line communication tomorrow. But I would just want to show you how you go from a hanger into a bracket into a hanger, okay, into another hanger, but it's in the opposite directions. Triangulation line conditions overcross signal and position of one graph. Sets communication line circles and line conditions setting to travel in the opposite direct location. Direct modification line cycles and high center interference of cyclism line condition ESP. Position lines of platforms communication lines and direct signals into modification to its earth and set location of travel. Hooah. Right? So you have to be a friendship and a relationship with everything in settings to get self-awareness of its consciousness. That puts everything back in line connection setting and all formation locations into your VR system and travel. Hooah. Okay? So that's what the team's coming into line connection settings now. All right, once you guys get into 150, then it gets really interesting. High correlation setting and position location measure. All right, so bracket communication line interference has a zero location line setting to travel. Point lines of graph, flux capacitor lines. Now the flux capacitor can go this way, which is an upline signal. All right, or it can go in this way on a downline signal in set location. All right, so it's really understanding, you know, when you're in a standard, you have one gear, second, third, fourth, and fifth, but in position. Anything faster, you're in an H in set location. All right, so it's all about directing us how to get into modification and how to go into the first gear, into second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear. So it's really understanding how to modulize it, how to monetize it, how to modify long rotations, how to correlate the communication of the spectrum, how to position its location setting to its console, and navigation line setting and all line rotations and certain location. Okay, how to really get into the core in direct signals and travel of modification line screens and calculus modification. How to travel, how to navigate your settings through your console. All right, so that's the 3 provision line cycles, generate screen lines. So once the binary really understands the program location of the biokinetic screen interference, sets position location of its tether. Bracket communication lines of 2 zeros and 3 line setting. Okay, points lines of graph, 1 signal, half pipe, Relates to track lines, high center interference, position measure. Sets lines of 2-line cycles and generation. You guys have to get into the swirls. You have to get into the cosmic universe lines. You have to get into communication north, west, south, and east. You got to get in your position locations to a continuous force line. Sets communication line signals. Sets communication lines of balance and traction. Okay? Know exactly what you're doing in line setting when you're picking things up and travel in lines of data and process communication. Okay? Travel calculus on platforms, line rotation cycles, 1, 2, and 3 track location. Okay? And you do it all through your binaries and transition resistance locations. So once you understand that, you have the truth narratives, right? Let's add lines of zeros. Half pipe, half pipe. Okay, so you have to understand why the moon is in a half pipe. 2 half pipes communication off the moon, right? Center line, center interference, you're looking at communication lines and travel position point graphs. Center correlation line conditions, all levels of 2. Sets communication lines of 2 line cycles and high center. Sets communication lines of 1 line rotation surface. Track location the opposite direction setting to travel. Direct lines of modification line cycles, high center interference, and position location, mystical cortex lines of design. Direct modification lines of center communication lines of high center interference location of design. Sets calculation lines center high interference of earth line rotations, calculation line of design. Set position. All 3 calculations. What do we have in calculation? Intelligence. Set communication setting. Hooah. See? Everything is a formation of face recognition intelligence, guys. But you have to be self-aware of everything that's going on with you inside. This helps you to guide you. Guidance is everything through navigation. And this process is you in all levels of formation. How to use yourself through the grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres of you. How to use your earth, your air, your water, and your fire. Okay? All process you into the VR system and travel in position of point graphs communication to all lines and calculations into its VR system. Okay? See you in 5.